Welcome to this inspirational talk by Christian Science practitioner Bobby Lewis. His talk was recorded at a recent CherishAbility Adaptive Family Camp program in Colorado. These are some of the participants. Bobby has been witnessing wholeness in everyone during his life ministry. Bobby served as a Marine Corps chaplain for several years. He and his wife Natalie later served as ranch directors at Adventure Unlimited in Colorado, where they helped found the 100 Elk Outdoor Center. In 2007, they founded the Link School, a high school for Christian Scientists that honors a wide range of learning styles. Bobby has master's degrees in biblical studies and in addiction counseling. Bobby is now a journal-listed Christian Science practitioner, helping others find healing through prayer. His beautiful articles and poems can be found in the Christian Science periodicals at jshonline.com. Today, he's going to share his thoughts on cherishing the God-given abilities of everyone, including those who have developmental special needs. His talk is titled, God Able Is. Incidentally, we had just announced our new name, CherishAbility.
I love your hat. How did you get a hat already that says CherishAbility?
All the bags for everybody have these too.
Oh, well, I was just thinking it is such a lovely renaming of this organization in terms of cherishing ability. I imagine for each of us, when you think about cherishing, think about something slightly different, but I think about cherishing as like holding something in sacred trust. And that was in my mind in particular just recently because we have an old barn on our property, and I was walking by the barn and I heard this noise. It sounded like a big insect going by my ear, and I looked, and it was only about this big, but it wasn't an insect. Hello. It was a bird. It was a baby hummingbird that had just fledged. A few weeks later, I found where the nest was because it had built its nest in my raft. But it was a baby hummingbird that had probably just left the nest and flown down and landed right in front of me. But next to the barn, that's where the horses and the donkeys and the cats and the dog, everything walks there. I thought, oh, this isn't going to work for this little baby hummingbird. So I picked it up. The way I was holding that bird made me think about this idea of cherishing in terms of this organization, because when you pick up a baby bird, you scoop it up, but you don't want it to fly if you're trying to get it somewhere safe, and so you just create that little space in your hands and hold it gently where it knows it's safe, and then move it to wherever, or if you're holding it and praying for it because it's at the window or whatever it is, that cherishing space. I think Mary Baker Eddy talks about an idea that's relevant to this, where she says that divine love underlies, overlies, and then encompasses all true being. And I just think, yeah, that's what this organization is doing. It's cherishing. But to cherish, I mean, that's a verb, right? And it needs an object. And the object that was chosen is ability. And I thought, oh, that's just such a beautiful bringing together of ideas, to cherish and to cherish ability. And I was thinking about ability in three ways for this evening. First, that when we cherish ability, it's really primarily, or at least first, God's ability that we cherish, right? I mean, we cherish our own ability, others' ability, but it is God that's where all ability is sourced from, is God. And so that's a good place to start in terms of cherishing that ability. There's a hymn that has that line, God able is. God able is. And like that, every bit of ability that is experienced, that is witnessed to when we're seeing that in others, that it is from that divine source. And so I think, okay, cherishing ability, cherishing God's ability, the source of all ability, but also cherishing our own ability in whatever position or role we are in life, and that changes for us, right? In different settings and different things. Sometimes we're the participant, sometimes we're caregiving, sometimes we're in a parental role or family member. The roles change, but regardless of the role, there's that opportunity to cherish our own ability to understand that who we uniquely are as an individual idea of God, that is coming from this divine source of ability, the ability to be that person. And then we definitely cherish the ability of others. We witness together to what each person it is and is being, it isn't just created in the past to be, but is being created in the present to be. And that's a big part of this organization is, I think, cherishing one's own ability in whatever role, but then also witnessing together to each participant and member of the community having that divinely created ability. And I just loving that idea in terms of in the weeks since knowing, I'm going to get to meet and talk together with you all this evening, thinking these are good things to be able to talk about, to bring those two things together, to cherish ability, to hold in sacred trust. What? To hold in sacred trust that God created individual idea and to hold that intact and witness to that. And the poet Godfrey John, the writer and poet Godfrey John, I think he was writing about this to some degree at the end of a poem called This Moment of Your Living. And at the end of that poem, God is the voice or the speaker in this poem. And it says, "You are what you are because I am that I am. You are what you are because I am that I am now, moment by moment by moment." That seems like it really speaks to cherishing ability. You are what you are because I am that I am now, moment by moment by moment. Then there's a break. By moment is the way the poem ends. Can you all hear me? Am I speaking too silently? Okay. If Natalie was here, she'd be in the back saying, "You're mumbling," but I will try not to mumble too much. I was thinking tonight about 3 messages from Christ Jesus about cherishing ability. 1 from Paul, but 3 from Christ Jesus, because I think this is a huge part of Jesus' ministry, was the ability to see the divine created identity of every person he was in contact with, to bring that out for them, to bring that out for the disciples, to show that and to witness to that. And it seems like that's what you all are doing in this organization, is following that Christ example of seeing the divine idea for yourself, for others. And the first account that I want to reflect on together was in the lesson last week. People really don't like this story. I happen to love it. Here's why. The Canaanite woman. People don't like this story because the dialogue between Jesus and this woman just sounds so harsh the way it's written up. But I want to propose something. The dialogue that was actually happening was not between Jesus and the woman. The dialogue that was happening was between Jesus and the disciples. Here's why. I think he was addressing that which God gives, the Christ healing presence, the witnessing to divine ability, that is for all. And that's what I think this story shows, because this woman, this Canaanite woman, comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, I have a real need with my daughter, and she needs to be healed." And but so Jesus' first approach is to ignore her, right? He pays her no attention at all. And I think he knew long before she arrived what her need was, and that she was a woman of deep faith, and that he would heal this child. I think that was all known to him, but he ignores her because that was what society was teaching about her and her daughter. And the disciples, took note that he was ignoring her, as he should, and said, "Hey, should we throw her out?" Then Jesus speaks to her before that happens, because there's more that he wants to see accomplished here. And and she says to him then, I really need you to help me. And he says, I'm not here for you. I don't think he was speaking for what he was actually there to do, because he knew he was going to heal that child. He was speaking, though, to what the custom, the societal beliefs, he was speaking to the problems. Who he was really speaking to, I think, was the disciples. Because what he was doing thus far was exactly what they thought he probably should be doing. Ignore her, throw her out, okay, at least tell her why she's wrong. That's a good step. And then her response to that was to say again, no, I really need your help. And so he gives another belief. He says, yeah, the bread, the bread of the Christ, it's not for you. It's not, the right thing to give this bread that should be given to the children of Israel to dogs. That's the line, I think, that really stings, when people read it. But you all are in a community where people at times are treated as so different that just basic human respects and such can be lost in societal beliefs. And I think the disciples probably wouldn't have batted an eye at what he said, because that was the belief. I mean, he was saying a belief of the custom of the time. But then she says this remarkable line, which I don't know that he would have anticipated, but she says, even the dogs eat from the master's table. Then he heals the child. But that dialogue, I think that dialogue was really between Jesus and the disciples. I think he was saying, hey, we've been taught a lot of stuff about how God sees some people and not other people. And that he was saying, I'm here to tell you to throw all that out, because the way God sees individuals is equal. Every divine idea created equally and of value, that God's ability is being expressed and manifested through each person. And there was a beautiful, in that section, in the lesson last week, there was this beautiful line in Science and Health that says, love, how does it go? Love is impartial. Love is impartial and universal. I mean, that's a beautiful description, I think, of what he was teaching there, that love is impartial and universal. That's cherishing ability, I think, is that deep understanding that the Christ presence gives, that love is, in truth, impartial and universal. It says, in its adaptation to each individual, each setting, and bestowals, the way it is given. Love is impartial and universal in its adaptation and bestowals. And certainly in this community, I mean, that's something that is really felt, I think, and believed and practiced by this group. I wrote a poem about, there are a few poems that I would like to share tonight, some of mine, some from others. This is a poem that was in the Sentinel recently that speaks to, like, are some people excluded? And especially the feeling when you feel that for yourself, that somehow you're excluded from God's love, God's healing presence, that true spirituality. It's called hard times. Everybody's hard is hard. And when it is, it suggests aggressively that you have been separated from God, good, no longer loved by love, not deserving of being loved by love. But you know the truth, and there is no truth in that. Difficult circumstances cannot separate you from your father, mother. Nothing can do that. Nothing at all. The kingdom of God, the reign of divine love is at hand. Within, without, unchanging, unchangeable, embracing you in healing love. And that's called Hard Times. If you want to look it up on JSH, it was in a recent Sentinel. So 2 parables I took a course in grad school on parables that I really loved with John Key, who wrote a textbook on the New Testament and a book on the parables. And one of the things that I remember from that course, I mean, this was a while ago, but one of the things about parables, I remember him teaching that made them different than a teaching story or a fable or a myth or something like that, was that parables consistently that Jesus was teaching had two elements. They always had a surprise. It never tracked in a linear way to an expected conclusion. Now we know what's in the parables, so they sound expected to us. So like when we read them in the Bible lessons, like, yeah, I know what happens. But then as listeners would have been like quite taken aback by there's always a turn in them. And I find that part of them really interesting. I was thinking about this in terms of what parables do, that they have a turn that's unexpected and that they bring something new to light. That's the other part, that they always reveal something new to the listener. And I was sitting at my desk where I work. It's near the river. I have some bird feeders up. And I was just looking out the window and a bird flew in. Then a whole flock of them flew in. They were starlings, and it was cloudy. And so they arrived, and they were feeding on the ground. There were a ton of them. And but there's just a little black bird, quite nondescript, until the clouds parted and this ray of sunlight came through the clouds and hit these birds. And they have iridescent feathers, and so their feathers refract the light like a prism does. And so these birds, there were hundreds on the ground, went from being this little mob of black birds to brilliant purple and green and blue with reds and gold. And I mean, it was incredible. Every bird lit up like that in the sunlight. And I thought, that's what parables do. Parables bring things to light in an unexpected way. And I knew starlings had iridescent feathers, but I was, it was just caught me off guard in such a beautiful way to see them lit like that. So the first parable I was thinking about is the parable of the talents. This parable, I'm gonna speak up because now that we got a fan on, I think it'll pick up a little bit better. This parable, I think, addresses the idea of ableism. Ableism is that that concept that typical abilities are superior. I mean, it wouldn't have been a word that was used then, but the idea was certainly just as prevalent then as now. But one dictionary definition of ableism is that a society's determination that typical abilities are superior, and anything else other than that is subpar. I think Jesus was addressing this in this parable, the parable of the talents. So you all know this parable. Here's a quick recap. The master has a little bit of coinage and he's going out of town. So he hands it out, one to one person, two to another. What was it? It was 5 to the other person. And so he gives it out and says, take care of my money, make good decisions, I'll be back. And so he goes away and then he comes back. And the person with who does it talk about first? It's the person with 5 first. And they got a lot. So they were in a pretty good position anyway. But they had taken what they had been given, they put it to use, they put it to work. And when he came back, they gave him 10. And he gives him a blessing. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many. So he gives them this blessing. And they're off. And then the other person who had, was it 2? 2. So that's a lot less than the 5. But they had put theirs to use it in a similar way. And they had 4. 4 does not compare to 10. It's less than half of 10. But the master gives a blessing, the exact same blessing. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many. Word for word, the same blessing. It had nothing to do with the amount. It had to do with whether that person had put what they were given into life, into practice, brought it to light. And then the last person said, rightly they felt like, well, I got kind of shortchanged here. I only got one. I was just going to bury it, but I brought it back just so I could chuck it back at you and make my complaint. And then they were cursed. It's a bit harsh, but they were cursed not because they had won, right? If they had started with a half and ended up at one, certainly they would have gotten the same blessing, because it didn't matter to the master, to God, to Christ. It didn't matter how much or how many. It just was about bringing to light who God had created them to be, and to put what God was giving them in terms of those talents, those abilities, to cherish them, to put them to use. And I think that's a very helpful parable in terms of that, in terms of addressing that idea that society says, well, this is what is typical, so this is what is valued, and other things are not valued in the same way because they're not typical. Some of you may have seen the television show. Sorry to use that word. I'm sure it's not called television in the same way now, but the show. I don't know what to call it. Called The Extraordinary Attorney Wu.
Yes.
Has anyone seen that? It's quite amazing. It's about a Korean woman who's on the autism spectrum. She's an attorney, and early in the show, maybe it's in the first episode, and one of the other attorneys said to her, "You are not ordinary," and her answer, it's in subtitles, because it's in Korean. It's a Korean show, is, "Yeah, I'm not ordinary." And she doesn't say the words when she walks out of the office, but she's expressing that she knows she's extraordinary, which she is. It is a beautiful show, I think, exploring the uniqueness of God-created ability. It's I don't know, there's maybe 10 episodes or something like that. But do you like the show?
Oh, I absolutely love it, and there's going to be a second season.
That's great.
Yes.
Because she just left her job, and I don't know what's going to happen next. Don't tell me, please. Um, yeah,
She's the first autistic attorney in Korea.
yeah.
Really, don't miss it.
The Extraordinary, it probably is Netflix. Extraordinary Attorney Wu, WOO. Yeah,
It's so precious.
it is.
A lot of Korean Chinese.
Yeah. In Science and Health, I think there's a way that Mary Baker Eddy addresses this idea of ableism. I think she talks about it when she writes and when she speaks about the infinite idea being developed. I think she's addressing that concept that some individuals would be valued differently to God than others. And she's rejecting that. There are two passages in particular that I was thinking about for tonight. There's one that says, God expresses in man the infinite idea. I think it's appropriate to add, like in one's thought or reciting that God expresses in every man, everyone, the infinite idea, forever developing itself, broadening, and rising higher and higher from a boundless basis. God expresses in man the infinite idea, forever developing itself, broadening, and rising higher and higher from a boundless basis. I mean, it's a completely radical spiritual idea. And she then speaks to, well, what's our role in that then, as a family member, a caregiver, a participant? What is the role of a person in understanding that? And she says, the admission to yourself that man is God's own likeness sets man free to master the infinite idea. The admission to yourself that man, yourself, others, this person that you love and are caring for, the admission to yourself that man is God's own likeness sets man free to master the infinite idea, to master that expression of their God-created identity and individuality. And it's beautiful. I it's such a powerful and radical understanding of the nature of God and of man. And um, I was thinking about this when I was kayaking a couple days ago. Um, I hadn't noticed, even though we live right on the river is always super low right now, but I hadn't noticed that that the water had essentially been turned off. There's maintenance being done upriver, and so they've diverted the water out of the Arkansas. And if normally it's running knee deep this time of year, it's running like ankle deep. And so I got to the put in my kayak, and I thought, well, this isn't going to work. There is no water in this river. But I was there and I really wanted to go. And my car was already at the other end and I didn't want to walk down the highway, for 5 miles carrying my kayak. So I thought, no, I was sitting there. I thought, what should I do? And this thought came to mind. The water is going to end up down there. There may not be much of it, but it's going to go by where your truck is. And I thought, yeah, the water is all going to get there. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that I could get there in a kayak, but it did matter to me that the water, just that concept that the water would get there. And then what came to mind is Mrs. Eddy's statement about gravitating Godward, that we almost gravitate Godward. And I thought every drop of this water, by nature of what it is going to flow down past that spot. And I thought I was thinking about, meeting with you all this evening, and that was what was in my thought, that the infinite idea, that is something that every one of us gravitates towards. It's not something achievable for some and not for others. That is the destination that we are all headed to, is the understanding of our own manifestation of the infinite idea. And whether we're witnessing to that for ourselves or others, that confidence that not only may happen, but it is the truth that is being revealed, the infinite idea being revealed, gravitating Godward to that infinite idea. And I've loved that. That was probably a week ago, and I've just loved this week reflecting on that. Oh, that's such a good question. So improbably, because all metaphors break down, right? But in this case, I never had to get out of the boat. I ended up at the truck. It felt somewhat miraculous, and but there, every little slot, even sometimes I'd have to turn the kayak sideways and crawl, pull over the rock. But I did end up at the truck. I know. I was very happy, and to have the opportunity to reflect on kayaking in a talk, that makes for a good evening right there. So the second parable I was thinking about was the tares and the wheat. I think Jesus is also in this case reflecting on. I think he's reflecting in part on being in a caregiving role, and I really learned a lot about this parable at a point in parenting when, boy, I just was feeling like, God, I'm just not doing a very good job with this. I don't know that I thought parenting would be easy, because I was not an easy kid, so I wasn't expecting, an easy road. But I was surprised by just how hard it was, how demanding it was, in terms of feeling like, oh, I'm just not doing a very good job here. And I was praying about that one evening when our girls were little, and what came to mind was a few things, but the first one was to wait on God, like to stop just jumping into things and doing whatever came to mind or saying whatever came to mind. It just wasn't helpful. This lesson this week, I think, reflects a lot on that, on waiting on God, having the patience to let God have a voice in the conversation before one's own voice is heard. And then what God was also speaking to me that evening in prayer was to learn how to nourish wheat instead of pulling tares. I just found when our children were little, I just felt like I had to correct the problems all the time. Well, I think as people, as human beings, we're pretty attracted to seeing problems and trying to fix them. But that's different. That's like pulling tares, and that's different than nourishing wheat. And if you think back to this parable, in that parable, there's the field and the owner and the farm hands, and they've sowed wheat, but someone comes and sows weeds to ruin the wheat, an enemy. Um, so what would have been a beautiful crop now has all these problems, and they come and they say, hey, should we? And what's their suggestion? Yeah, pull out all the problems, right? Pull out all the weeds. And the owner says, well, wait. No, that because there's going to be a problem with that. All the good's going to get pulled out at the same time. You may pull out all the problems, but you're not going to have any good left when you're done doing that. And he says, he doesn't use this word nourish. This is my word, but uh, it's not really my word. I feel like that's what God was telling me to do. Learn how to nourish wheat and to see the good, to strengthen it, to when the good is nourished enough. And here's the end of the parable. The master says, at the end, both will be harvested. The wheat will be harvested. And the way it reads in the King James, it sounds like the weeds then are all just pulled out and burned. However, that professor that I was referring to, I really love the way he explained that from his travels and time in the Middle East. He said, that's not what tares are used for. Tares are gathered, bundled, and used as kindling, as fire starter in the cook stoves. They have a purpose. They are sold like they are of value. And I think that's probably what Jesus was saying, is that the problems that we perceive as problems, if we just strengthen and nourish the wheat, the good is brought to harvest and recognized. And the things that we were feeling were problems also are things that we learned from and that turn out to be beneficial and usable. I think that it's really a beautiful description of that. And that I think is the rule whenever one is in a caregiving role, as a parent, as a family member, as as someone who's doing that as part of their work and outreach, in whatever way one is doing that. I think the role that we're really called to is to be patient and waiting on God, allowing God's voice to be present and directive in our interactions with those that we're working with. And then, however is possible, to see the good and strengthen that, and not feel like the role is to find the problems and pull them out to fix. Even though as human beings we're wired in a way that it feels like, oh, but I just have to fix these problems. But it's not true. I mean, spiritually, it's we have the ability to recognize the need and then seek the answer, and not just feel like we have to address the problem. And I really love that parable in terms of the work. It has to do with cherishing ability. I think nourish wheat and cherish ability are pretty synonymous ideas. There's a poem about that I really love. It's a 1962 poem by a woman named Abigail Joss. It was in the Sentinel. My mom used to pray this for me. She didn't pray it out loud. She would just pray it for herself. And then when we had children, she said, I have a poem to teach you. And she taught me this poem. She said it was probably the single most helpful thing in the years of us being at home as kids. It goes like this. Release is the title. Beloved child, beneath love's wing, beyond my human parenting, may I have grace to see you so, and only know what God knows. Let me loose you from the bands that sense would forge from false demands, my finite fear, desire, design, with which I'd bend your will to mine. Instead, to his authority, whose love upholds both you and me, may I surrender human will, and yielding, find you closer still. It's called Release, if you want to look it up. It's there on JSH. It's lovely. So one other thought, this is from Paul about this idea of cherishing ability. Paul talks about be steadfast. He says, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. And one of the ways he speaks about being steadfast, I think, is when he talks about putting on the whole armor of God. The whole armor. I don't know that I know it in the order that Paul writes about it, because it's easier for me to remember the whole armor if I start at my feet and work my way up. But think about this armor that Paul says we have. He says, put on the whole armor of God. Like, this is what allows us to be steadfast. Your feet shod with the gospel of peace. There's, if you don't like mice, okay. It just went the other way. It was right at your heel. I thought it was going to run up your leg, but yeah, but it was at Liz's sock giving a sniff. It's gone. That's right. We were talking about feet shod with the gospel of peace, and the mouse showed up. Your loins girt about with what? With truth. Your loins girt about with truth, breastplate of righteousness, helmet of salvation, sword of the Spirit, shield of faith. Yeah, so he said, okay, so that's the armor that you get to be steadfast. Except there is a key piece of armor that Paul leaves out. I do not think this was a mistake, but there is a major piece of armor that any combatant would have been wearing at that time. What is missing in what he gives you? Oh, somebody just said it already. What is not covered? Yeah, your back. Like, he gives nothing for that. Feet, loins, breastplate, helmet, sword, and shield. Nothing for your back. I think he was talking in Ephesus. It was, a Roman community, a warring people. They would have picked up on that immediately, that your back is not covered. Your back is covered. I mean, he was saying if we face the things that are demanding, that are hard for us to understand, to know how to navigate, things that feel beyond us, that humble us, that turn us to God, that when we face those things, when we're steadfast, that the answers are there, that God able is to reveal the needed answers about what God is doing, about the ability of oneself to be able to bring witness to what God is doing, the ability of the person we're in relationship with in terms of their God-given ability to be expressive of the infinite idea. That we are created in a way that we can be steadfast, put on that whole armor, and not feel like the only answer is for me to turn away from this because I'm ill prepared. Things in life feel like that, right? Like, I can't deal with this because I don't know how to deal with it. But the question is, does God know? And if God knows, then we have the ability to know from God what it is that brings progress and resolution and healing and expression, to that need. And I was thinking about this just this weekend because I try and take a little prayer retreat time each month, 2 days or so, just to be still, be out somewhere that's quiet, listen, not bring anything to read or do. I just walk and sit and listen. And years ago, I'd started going to this one area because it's very remote. I've been going for years. I've never seen a single person out in that wilderness. I really love that. This time I didn't see any cars on the road, none at the trailheads, not a person, and not a single human track out there where I was. So I'd read in the guidebooks that this one canyon, there was no way in and there was no way up and out because the cliff bands are so consistent, 1,000 feet high for so many miles stretching around all this. But it seemed to me that there was probably a way in and there was probably a way out. And so years ago, I had started walking every step of the canyon rim through all these convoluted canyons. Then at one point, some years ago, I found a way, what would be out. I knew that if I could get back to that spot, I could get out. I didn't yet know how to go in. And so I would just go and, it would be too snowy to work out the route, and I'd walk back out and then I'd go again and it would be too muddy. And then I would go and it would be too muddy and too snowy. And I would go and the road would be closed. I would find a way in, but it would be too scary. And I would find a way in, but I'd run out of water. And I mean, just I'd go and go and go, and I really didn't care that much about the outcome, but I really cared about the journey of seeing if there was a way in. Thank goodness for this mouse, because keeping everybody so awake. I think God knew that this talk has to be more exciting. We're gonna bring a mouse, and but on this last trip, Saturday, during the eclipse, I found this hidden way in that I'd been looking for years, and walked, not knowing if I could connect around through all these series of cliffs that were there. Part of the challenge is that I have my dog with me. The dog can climb, and I have a harness for him, and I have a rope, and he can rappel. He's pretty good at canyoneering and mountaineering, but it still has to be something a dog can do. And and so, but we made our way through this whole route, in, through, up, and out. And I was back on the top after so many years of trying to figure that out. And I thought, ooh, there was a sweet feeling in just the reward of being persistent, being steadfast. Does canyoneering mean anything? No, it doesn't. But just the experience of being out, being still, being observant, that means something to me. And there was joy in figuring it out. But I think we use the things that we choose to do in life, whether it's thinking, man, I'm going to make a sourdough loaf that is just perfect, or whatever it is that we choose to do. I think a big part of that is knowing that the nature of divine love is to reveal to us through the things that we're doing, things that are transferable to the things that are also part of our lives that we need encouragement and inspiration and direction with. And I thought, for the work that you all are doing in this organization, in CherishAbility, I think that trust that there is a way forward, there is a way to help, to be blessed, to be expressive, for each of those that are participants in this program, to be expressive of who God is showing them that they are, that your steadfastness in witnessing to that makes a difference, and there is reward and beauty and completion in that. And yes. I have two poems that I want to end with tonight. I don't know when we started or how we're doing time-wise, but this is where we are. Okay. I didn't know what our community would be tonight, whether it be participants and caregivers and parents and family members, or but I was thinking about this poem particularly in terms of participants. I think this is coming out in a journal shortly. I don't think it's been published yet. It's called Formed. Formed. In the beginning, formed by Spirit, there was light, the spiritual image, all good. Then a mist of confusion, serpents speak of good and evil, the belief of being deformed into matter, separate, in pain, afraid. But that is not the end of the creation narrative. No. We are not left to wallow in that lie of separateness. Messianic revelation illumines us as born again in the purifying, healing waters of Christ's truth, entirely inseparable from God, good, painless, fearless, made new by divine love, moment by moment. It's called Formed. That's, that'll be in a journal, I think, this spring. And this is one called Learning to Trust that I want to end with tonight. This is for everybody. Learning to trust. This was in a Sentinel recently. Step by step, I am feeling Spirit's leading. I am learning to trust. I do less personal planning and am more spiritually prepared. I am learning to trust. I am more aware of you, God, less full of myself. I am learning to trust. I am being loved by love beyond my fears. I am learning to trust day by day, nudge by nudge. The Christ is showing me the way. The way. I am learning to trust. A benediction for tonight. In the New Testament, it gives this blessing, really. I thank you, God, for these great and precious promises. I thank you, God, for these great and precious promises. And then in Science and Health, Mary Baker Eddy echoes that and says, the promises will be fulfilled. I thank you, God, for these great and precious promises. The promises will be fulfilled. God bless you.
Thank you.